Good morning, and I am Reverend Sandana Gallman Ashley, your transitional Senate leader, and I'm very happy that you're here this morning for this special presentation. This presentation is being recorded so that we can share it later with those who were not able to be with us this morning. I am very excited to have my friend and colleague with us this morning. She is Commissioned Pastor Lisa Allgood, the Executive Presbyter for Cincinnati Presbytery. Lisa has been trained as an immunocytochemist and a graduate of the University of Medicine and Dentistry in New Jersey. Lisa spent 36 years as an executive in the pharmaceutical industry, and she is now here to talk with us this morning about vaccines, viruses, variants, and vaccines. Oh my. Lisa, we are so glad to have you this morning. She has been a resource for our denomination ever since COVID started, and we are blessed to have her with us this morning. Lisa, we're turning it over to you, and let's just all welcome her and thank her for being here with us.
Thank you, Sandana. And it is fun to see all the New York, New Jersey. So those of you who are in Central Jersey who are wondering what the heck is the University of Medicine and Dentistry, New Jersey, it's now the Robert Wood Johnson Medical Center. So I went to Rutgers College as an undergrad, then went across the river to Columbia, and then came back across the river to Piscataway to finish out at the university. So so I've been back and forth across the Hudson for the first 32 years of my life. And it is, so it's sort of fun to see what God will do with a thrice retired immunologist. You never know what's going to happen next. So I'm gonna start with some really basic information on the virus, but I really want to bring it up to date very quickly. I think some of you have heard this before. COVID is not a unique virus. There are 7 types of Kovids out there. We've seen them before. 4 of them cause the common cold, along with something called a rhinovirus. 2 of them have been mini epidemics or pandemics. There was SARS that came out of Singapore in 2014. It was a respiratory virus. And then there was MERS, another respiratory virus that came out of the Middle East in 2012. Both of those are way, way, way more highly fatal, but not nearly as infectious. This COVID-19 is 3 times more infectious. The original virus now is 3 times more infectious than any other respiratory virus we've seen. It's not highly fatal, the original. It's about a 1% fatality rate. That's 10 times more than the flu, but it is associated with significant long-term morbidity in just about any organ system you can name. So for every 1 fatality, there are 18 permanent cardiac disease. There are 10 permanent lung scarring disease. I've seen MRIs and CAT scans of young female cross-country runners, probably some of the healthiest lungs you'll ever see, and they are permanently scarred. You have 3 kidney disease. You have 3 cognitive decline, as much as potentially 10 IQ points, 9 IQ points, which is 10 years of cognitive decline. There are other neurological symptoms, everything from loss of taste and smell, which was one of the original cardinal symptoms, to loss of the ability to walk, to development of schizophrenia and psychoses. And so it is an insidious virus. It is certainly not one to mess with. It can get into your thyroid and mess up your metabolic system. It can get into your pancreas and actually cause diabetes, even if you don't have a predilection for it. It can get into your GI tract. And so it goes all over the body. So clearly not a virus that you want to deal with. As viruses replicate in the human body, they literally evolve second by second because they tend to replicate incompletely. That's how variants emerge. Most of those variants that come from that incomplete replication die out because they're not infectious, but those that are more infectious than the original virus are those variants that become opportunistically the predominant variants in circulation. So certainly that happened with the initial one that came out of the UK, now called Alpha. That one was about twice as infectious as the original variant. And now we have Delta. Delta is 200 times more infectious than the original variant. The original variant, to become infected with a virus, there are two predicting factors. One is the number of virus particles you're exposed to. The other is the amount of time you're exposed to the virus. So for COVID-19, the original virus, because it is so infectious, the maximum or the minimum, I guess, time to infection was 15 minutes. If you were in front of that virus for 15 minutes, you would be infected. With Delta, because Delta is so much more infectious, that minimum time to infection is only 10 seconds. It is very highly infectious. It is also systemically somehow more significant for younger. The original virus really tended to affect those who are 65 and older. This one tends to affect those who are 40 and younger, although everybody is susceptible. There is breakthrough with those who are vaccinated. The last, and I have some data on that, which I will go through, but for the most part, the vaccines work. The vaccines that are available now in the United States, there are 2 mRNA vaccines and one that is not. Moderna and Pfizer are mRNA based. This virus is essentially, it's actually a wimpy thing. It's not alive. It's a sack of fat with protein spikes on the outside. That's what makes it called a crown. And then there's a single strand of messenger RNA in there. That's the virus's genome. What happens is those protein spikes attach to a human host cell, inject the mRNA into the human host cell. The viral mRNA takes over the cellular mechanism, replicates the virus, bursts the cell, and so more virus particles come out. And that replication continues over and over and over again. mRNA vaccine platforms have been around for about 30 years. This is not a new way to make a vaccine. And I think that's the thing that people misunderstand. This is not a new way to make a vaccine. We've tried to make mRNA vaccines against Zika, against HIV, against Ebola, against Marburg, against some other respiratory syncytial viruses. The difference here is that while the safety data has always been very good, very favorable for the mRNA vaccines, they have not shown efficacy. And that's why none have ever been commercialized. So they weren't efficacious against the viruses for which they were targeted. COVID-19 is the first time this long-standing platform has actually proved to be efficacious. And boy, is it efficacious. 95% efficacy on a vaccine is almost unheard of. And so they are very safe. We have a lot of data on mRNA vaccination safety, in addition to the trials that were run to prove efficacy for COVID-19. So both Moderna and Pfizer did trials on more than 45,000 people each to get to that emergency use authorization. And the important word there is emergency. A pandemic of this nature had to be stopped as fast as possible. So in combination with 30 years of safety data from the mRNA platform, plus the safety data in the initial phases of the clinical trials for the COVID-19 vaccine, plus the high degree of efficacy that was shown very early on, FDA released them without a full review, but they are still approved even with an emergency use. Pfizer is now fully approved. So all of the data of the last 18 months of Pfizer's program has been reviewed by FDA, and they say it is now fully approved for use in the United States. Moderna's is still under review. J&J's is also still under review, but there's no reason to expect that those won't be approved fully as well. So I want to set that out. So here's some good news. The vaccines work. Last week, The Lancet, which is a European, actually UK medical journal, gathered data from December 8th of 2020 through July 4th of this year, 2021. So about 7 months of data. And it showed that in the UK, this is true for the US as well, of more than 1.2 million adults who received at least one dose of a 2-dose sequence, less than 0.5% ever reported contracting breakthrough infections. Among those who got both doses, fewer than 0.2% experienced a breakthrough infection. Those data tend to hold. So the breakthrough infections tend to be about 1 in 10,000, 1 in 50,000, depending on how many people around you are vaccinated. And so the vaccines are highly efficacious. Vaccines work, we know this. I've said this to a friend of mine this weekend who was saying, man, I don't like vaccines. Well, this is going to sound morbid, but go to your local cemetery and look at the children who are buried there before 1950, and then look at the number that are there after 1950. It almost stopped. And that is because we came up with childhood vaccinations for things like smallpox and mumps and measles and rubella and diphtheria and tetanus and typhoid and tuberculosis. Most of those childhood diseases have been pretty much eradicated. And we're hoping, obviously, to do the same with COVID. The other good news is that masks work. And I know there was a lot of confusion at the very beginning of this pandemic that you don't need to wear masks. Vaccinated people don't need to wear masks, but masks work. And so another recent study that came out, and I've got the citation for it if anybody wants to see it. I've got both citations. Flu activity. Incidence of flu cases in November 2020 was 91% lower than in November of the year before. Even though flu vaccinations were up, we were masked because we were pretty much all under mandates at that point. Overall, we had less than 1% of the number of hospitalizations for flu nationally in 2020 than in any previous year. And that's because of the masks. So yes, masks work. They keep the viruses at bay. So here's the bad news. Every single one of our counties, with the exception of the state of Nebraska, and I've not figured that out yet, is at highest risk and vulnerability right now. We are all peaking at either the same or the higher than the worst peak we experienced in about January or February of this year. Here in Cincinnati, we have a number of very large hospitals, and we're one of the top 2 children's hospitals in the country, and they are overrun. The ERs are beginning, the emergency rooms are turning away anything that isn't COVID related. Our intensive care units are full again, and we are running a shortage of physicians and nurses. The Delta variant is the one you hear about. It's racing like wildfire. It's predominantly 97% in the unvaccinated at this point. But deaths from coronavirus from Delta jumped 131% between July and August of this year in just 1 month. There's been a 500% increase in hospitalizations amongst children between June and August of this year. 97% of infections, 99% of hospitalizations and deaths are in the unvaccinated. About of those who are fully vaccinated and go on to get COVID, they go on to generally get a mild form of it. So it comes across generally as a cold. That's not universal. I have friends who have been hospitalized. You all know some of them with more severe cases of COVID, even though they are fully vaccinated. But 30% of those who are fully vaccinated who do get infected are also completely asymptomatic. And so if the vaccinated people are running around without masks, they can still catch it, and they carry as much virus as an unvaccinated person, even though they don't get sick. And so they are still vectors, they can still spread it. So what I've been telling people in my presbytery is, please, for the love of God, if you can be vaccinated, if there's not a pre-existing condition where your physician says you really should not get vaccinated, please try to get vaccinated. These are safe, they are highly effective, and we are going to start to get boosters probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks. The boosters are already available for anybody who is immunocompromised. If you are immunocompromised, the vaccines tend to work less well, and so you should still be masked. The vaccines will not completely protect you, and that is part of the reasons why we're seeing breakthrough. There's been a lot of discussion about antibodies, that the antibody titer, the antibody levels that are measurable in blood and plasma, wane over time, that they decline. And that's true. That's true for any vaccination. That's actually what you would expect, because your body doesn't continue to make antibodies unless it's continually being challenged. However, there is another part of the immune system that is cellular. That is what the vaccine primes. So should your body, if you've been fully vaccinated, see the virus in any way, shape, or form, it will recognize that protein spike, because that's what the vaccine is coded for. It will recognize that protein spike as foreign, and it will start to produce antibodies from there. So antibody levels are not necessarily a good surrogate to tell you how immune you are, how strong your immune system is working against the virus. And with the additional boosters that we're going to get now, those are actually the same as the original vaccine. There are additional boosters that are in clinical development for the variants. So the next round of boosters that will be evaluated by FDA will be specifically against Delta and against the newest two variants that have come out, Lambda and Mu. Both of those appear to be about as infectious as Delta or slightly less, but they are in circulation. Lambda and Mu are now in all 50 states in the United States and in multiple countries as well. Lambda came out of Peru, Mu came out of a different part of South America. I'm not sure which country. They don't appear to be more virulent. In other words, they don't appear to cause more disease than Delta. So they're about the same. Right now, Delta is still very strongly predominant. There are preliminary studies against Lambda and Mu that says the vaccines tend to be fine, that tend to cover them. But every time you get a variant, you always run the risk that the vaccine is going to be slightly less effective. So when the next round of booster shots come out, get those too. Get your flu shot this year, even if you don't normally get a flu shot. This flu season is looking to be a bad one, partly because we're not masked anymore, although if we go back to masks, it'll be better. But the flu season starts in Southeast Asia and then starts circulating. And so we can get about a 3 to 4 month preview of what flu is coming. So the pharmaceutical manufacturers tend to make flu against what emerges out of South Africa, even if it morphs a little bit. But this year looks to be bad. Singapore is already bad. And anything you can do to boost your immune system right now is a good thing. I've been telling my churches here in the Presbytery, wear masks, whether you're vaccinated or not, indoors. CDC just yesterday revised its guidance and said, wear your mask outdoors if you're in a crowd. So that's the first time that suggestion has come back out. Our Presbytery office requires masks if you're in the office. And then the other thing I've been telling churches, and of course, these aren't mandates, these are suggestions, is to take a deep sigh and shoulder the fights that you're going to have. And if you can, go back to whatever precautions you had in place in your churches this past January, and just keep going forward through the winter with that until we see where this latest variant is going. Right now, we have had more than 222 million confirmed cases of COVID globally, with more than 4.6 million reported deaths. And those are just the deaths that are reported. In the United States right now, we have about 41 million confirmed cases and more than 667,000 deaths. In the US, we have way more than our share per capita of cases and deaths. And it's partly because we probably weren't given the right advice early on, either by our government officials or by CDC, who were being told what to say by government officials. Right now, we are more than 135,000 new cases per day in the United States. And the CDC is predicting a further increase of that to more than 200,000 cases per day. For vaccinations, right now, 40% of the world population across all countries has received at least one dose. But only 2% of people in low-income countries have received at least one dose, and so the mismatch is really tragic at this point. In the United States, about 62% have received at least one dose, and 53% are fully vaccinated. That's ages 12 and up. Vaccines for ages 5 to 12 should be approved this fall. I've heard everything originally. One of the former FDA commissioner said between Thanksgiving and Christmas. I think that actually may be moved up a little bit. So that's sort of the status of where we are now. Questions? I know it's a little dark rain cloud routine that I do all the time.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for the update. And we've already started to get 1 or 2 questions in chat. The way we would like to handle the questions would be for you to raise your hand, and then we'll call on you and take questions there. Samson, you were the first person to put a question in chat. Why don't you unmute and state your question, and then we'll give an opportunity for Lisa to answer.
Okay, thank you. Actually, it's a question from my mom. Well, her question was like, would we receive the same side effect on a booster shot as in the first 2? Like, can we expect the same? If I didn't expect any, I didn't have any side effects in my first 2, would I get something in a third shot, or vice versa? Like,
Yeah, I mean, so everybody's a little bit different. I can tell you
Yeah.
both my daughter and I got both Pfizer shots, and I had nothing except a sore arm, and she had a fever and chills for a day each time. So everybody's a little bit different. I think the most important thing to say is that whether you get a side effect or not, it doesn't mean the vaccine's not working. So it just means your body's handling the vaccine differently. And so the answer to almost every question you ask me is going to be, it depends. You can get a very different set of side effects on the booster than you did, or you can get absolutely nothing the same way you got the first time. It really depends on how your body handles it. But don't take that as, oh, it's definitely working best in me because I've got all these side effects. That's not necessarily the case. And I asked, Samson, I see that you asked, can you get the flu shot at the same time as the COVID booster shot? I would leave that decision to your doctor. I don't want to make that determination, but everything I've seen basically says they can do one in one arm and one in the other at the same time. There's no reason why you can't. Some physicians might, again, depending on your personal medical situation, might recommend 2 weeks apart. Some physicians are cautious about boosting your body too much all at once, and they'll say, let one settle in for 2 weeks before we give you the second one. I will say that CDC and the FAN Flu organization, which is the organization that watches the flu go around the world, is saying get your flu shot earlier this year because they're expecting it to be a bad flu season. So don't wait till November, October, try to get it in September if you can. Types of masks, Patty. It's a really good question. The N95 is the gold standard. That's the one the physicians use. There is one available on Amazon. I don't have the link in front of me. I think it's an NK95, is actually very good. And they're actually very readily available, unlike the N95s. A paper mask works. It works just as well as long as it's over your nose and mouth and sealed a little bit. Fabric masks tend not to work as well, but if you have a fabric mask into which you can put, this is a funny sound, but it works really well. If you can cut a piece of a vacuum bag and put that in your fabric mask, those vacuum bags have HEPA filters in them. Sometimes they're impregnated with things like silver or other metals that actually kill the virus. It's a great way, and they're actually not porous. So it's a great way to add an extra layer of protection in a fabric mask. So I hope that answered your question.
Patty, did that answer your question? Or did you have a follow-up?
I do have a follow-up. I have 2 follow-ups. I think it's really easy for people to not know the difference between masks and to even not wear the mask properly. So I think that's something I really struggle with, how much like technical information we should give to our congregation that borders on, a recommendation and versus a mandate.
Yeah.
And but there's just this logic that you could have people thinking, well, I'm wearing a mask so I'm protected, and yet it's really a difference in degree of protection, an important difference. And so that's one thing. Like, I'm not quite sure what to do with that information, because really the more secure and safe a mask is, because they're specified with their types of materials and how many layers they are and so forth. But the more effective they are, the more uncomfortable they are.
Yes.
Anyone who wears them, especially people who have to wear them all day, knows that. Can I just please add to this a question about singing? Because this is currently an issue in our church. And I know my husband is an expert in infectious diseases, and I'm a psychologist, but I'm a pediatric psychologist. I know enough about medical stuff. I can follow things. And you're especially soloists who's a really good diaphragmatic wind power. You're turning droplets into aerosols and you're projecting them. And so, and then there was a really interesting paper that just came out where they tested like the aerosol plume from singers, and they found that they didn't specify what kind of mask they were using, which is kind of silly, but a mask can present the forward plume, but it'll come out the side and drift backwards. So I'm sorry, I've gone on and on, but could you just make a comment on these couple of things? Yeah. The type of mask Yeah. And
Yeah, I will
singing.
send some resources to Sandana, and maybe she can send them out to the people on the call as well. So there's a couple of things. A trained singer can project up to 36 feet. I mean, and so that's because of diaphragmatic air. So I used to sing in the New York Chorale Society. I get this. And I also get that, yes, singing is an issue. Everybody wants to go back to singing. The masks that are particularly made for singers, Cincinnati Opera actually projected outside, did some outside productions this summer, but the choir was masked the whole time, and the soloists were not, but they were also 80 feet from the closest person at that point, other than each other. And those masks were singers' masks. So there is one that actually has a greater airspace that is also structured so that it doesn't suck in when the singer takes a breath. So it actually is much better. We have the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music here. We have many of my churches who bring in soloists from CCM as part of their choir, and they're always masked as well. So yes, singing can be done with masks. It can be done effectively with masks. The singers' masks are better, but you can sing even with the inexpensive NK95s. You can sing with any mask. You just got to be willing to suck in the fabric if you have to. So what I have told churches here is that right now I am recommending against choirs. Choirs have to be close together to hear the parts, and they do have to be able to project as a group. So unless you've got a really well-trained choir that can basically sing a cappella, so that they don't have to hear each other, I'm recommending against choirs at this point. Soloists, a couple of, a duet, a trio who can be distanced and distanced from the congregation is probably better. If you've got to sing, make everybody mask, and maybe you don't sing all 6 verses of each hymn. Maybe you sing the first and the fourth. One of the most beautiful things I saw last summer when we were still pretty much locked down, and this was a church that, it's a small church, but it has a projection ability, so it has screens up. They had a pianist play the hymns, and they projected the words on the screens. And it was a beautifully meditative way to think of the hymn differently, because everybody knows the tunes and the words if they're traditional hymns, but you actually got to see the words and think about it and internalize it a little bit differently. So there's lots of ways to do music without necessarily singing. And I would, again, think about all the ways that you can make this a core part of witness instead of because we've always done it that way and this is the way I want to do it. So yes, I saw Chris. Some of the choir who are not trained singers do get dizzy because they're not the right masks. And so maybe investing in the NK95s, and I'll see if I can find the Amazon link and I'll send it to Sandana. Nobody likes the masks. They restrict airflow, there's no question, but that's the point, is you're restricting airflow, so you're restricting that particleization. Singing inside, outside, if you're outside and you're distanced, like I said, CDC just changed their guidance again, that if you're singing in a group, or if you're in a group that is not who you live with and you're outside, you should still be masked. I mean, it's gotten that bad again. It really has. We are at peaks that we haven't seen before in some cases. And so Patty, to your other question, masks are masks. Any mask is better than nothing. But I think, N95, NK95, a fabric mask, if you can put that vacuum cleaner bag inside it or some other very protective layering, but the paper masks are really just fine. The only thing the CDC at this point is recommending against are the gaiters. If you can hold it up to the light and see light through it, it's not an effective mask. And I think that's the best way to describe it.
So Lisa, we're going to go to Chris and then to TK. And if you have a question, we're going to ask that you would just raise your electronic hand and we'll be happy to take your question. So Chris, you're first, and then next TK.
Thank you. Question I have, and it's going to involve you speculating a bit, Lisa, but you seem like one to speculate. Everybody's concerned with the here and now, but where do you envision this all going in the long term? Like where is a friend of mine had H1N1 2 years ago, and his doc told him that was a descendant of the 1918 Spanish flu. So,
yes.
What can we expect? What can we think about what can we tell our people and then ourselves so we can get through this, because this is a tough time for pastors in singular ways. Any thoughts on that would be appreciated.
Amen to your last statement. So the World Health Association, the World Health Organization has declared COVID-19 an endemic virus, which means it will never go away, very much like the Spanish flu. It too will morph and evolve. It's already doing that. It's what viruses do. That's a natural product of their incomplete replication. Originally, and I will say early, so this is not as much supposition as perhaps as paying attention to what CDC and my epidemiologist friends are doing. Originally, when the vaccines were in initial development, before the variants started to emerge, the World Health was saying what we can best hope for is that we have enough of the population vaccinated that there's a low level of transmission from those who are vaccinated, ages maybe 5 and up. Although I know there are vaccines in development in clinical trials for 6 months and up. But the World Health was saying, if we can get everybody vaccinated 5 and up, it will tend to circulate in children, young children, as a cold, and it will just stay there. If we don't get vaccines down there, that's probably okay, because they get a very mild form of it unless they've got some underlying medical condition. Now, I think what's happening is that because there's been so much vaccine hesitancy, and because we've done such a lousy job of getting this overseas, and there are reasons for that, the longer we have a large percentage of the population, anything over about 30%, unvaccinated, the variants will continue to emerge. And the fear at this point is that one will emerge that evades the original vaccines, and then we're right back to square one. So the push right now to get people vaccinated is partly to keep the variant emergence at bay as much as anything else. At this point, with a little over 50% of one of the richest countries in the world vaccinated, and less than 2% of the rest of our undeveloped world unvaccinated, we're a huge risk as a population. I mean, there will be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of more deaths without these kinds of vaccinations. There'll be hundreds of thousands of deaths left in the US if we don't push these vaccinations. And I recognize that not everybody likes them, not everybody believes in vaccination, but in this case, with this virus, the way that it has, the infectious profile that it has, and the long-term morbidity that it has huge economic impact to the United States, for the rest of the world. It has significant disability impact to the rest of the world. And we're going to continue to churn through variants and have to deal with it. And so that's what's coming. How is that for a little dark rain cloud answer?
Thank you, Lisa. We're going to go to our next question, and this person is from Kirk Prez, Genesee Valley. If you can change your name to your name, it'd make it a lot easier for us to call on you. So from Kirk Prez, Genesee Valley.
Thank you. My name is Kirk. I'm from the Presbytery of Genesee Valley. So I just wanted to ask, initially we heard a lot about surface transmission, and since then we've heard that surface transmission does not seem to be a real threat, but we had a lot of precautions in place, and we still see recommendations here for a hand sanitizer and frequent washing of hands. So can you help us, because we're trying to help everyone feel comfortable and yet also try to provide good information?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one observation, and then I'll answer the question. The combination of who was managing communication when COVID-19 hit last year did not help with continuity for those kinds of recommendations. So even in a normal flu season, washing your hands and hand sanitizer is a good idea. That's basic hygiene when viruses are around. I wouldn't change that at all. What COVID-19's particular fingerprint, if you'll pardon the pun, is it stays on impermeable surfaces for about 3 to 4 days, and on permeable surfaces for about 1 to 2 days. And we've learned that since about this time last year, as studies have gone on. So all of the recommendations that we had originally about keeping collection plates in the back so they weren't being passed around, and keeping communion in the back so they weren't being passed around, is less now about touch although it's great that the fewer people that touch that stuff, the better, because not everybody's washing their hands and not everybody's sneezing well or that. But right now, for me, it's more about, I don't want people walking around. I don't want people walking around and passing those things because I want to maintain the social distancing. So my recommendation is still, I know those somebody called them the McDonald's of communion the other day, the little prepackaged things. Never thought of it that way. I know they taste horrible, but that's still the safest way to bring communion because you're minimizing the number of people who are preparing and touching. And then if you can leave that and the collection plates in the back, people are going to start to get used to that. The church that I grew up in, which was actually in New York City, actually always had the collection plates in the back because it didn't want to take away from worship. That was how they did collections. And so it's not a bad thing to go back to necessarily. So my recommendation is still that you're keeping those protocols in place as much as you can. The thing I think we don't have to do quite as much as we used to is you don't have to sanitize every pew after every Sunday service. If a sanctuary is largely unused between a Sunday service and a Sunday service, there's not going to be virus particles there, but I would clean things that are touched frequently. Does that answer your question? Okay, cool.
So we have Lo from Central Press and then Bob from New York City Press.
Communion pudding cups. I just read that. That's really funny. That's good.
Hi, thank you, Reverend. The question that came up, actually, our pastor could not attend, but she's been texting with me as I've been updating her, is can you talk to us a little bit about some food protocols? Because, you know, people are anxious to come back. Our homecoming Sunday is coming up very quickly. People are planning and talking and yet holding back. So that would be very helpful, Lisa, if you could share some of that with us. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So again, I don't have my magic 8-ball with me, but fellowship hour is hugely important to Presbyterians. There's no question about that. I think most of my churches, if they have a fellowship hour, right now they're still doing them outside. The weather here's still good. They're having people bring their own food. Honestly, they're not doing anything that's prepared in a kitchen, not doing anything that is a buffet where people are serving themselves out of the same area. And part of that is for the same answer I gave Kirk. Part of it is just minimizing contact, minimizing or minimizing social distancing so that people are together. And of course, where food is concerned, people take their masks off. And so that's the reason not to do it. So we've been saying, if you're going to do fellowship hour, try to do it outside, try to do it still socially distanced as best you can, and try to have people bring their own food, or at least, so we just had a synod meeting a couple of weeks ago, and actually we were told to bring food from our respective presbyteries. Being the only presbytery in my synod that has Kentucky, I brought bourbon, but they were in little bottles. So it's bourbon in the bounds. But you know, if you can individually package things, that also helps. But anything that's being cooked and handled just carries that extra bit of risk. I think in any of these questions, you're not going to be able to eliminate risk, but what you can do is minimize it as best you can.
Thank you, Bob.
Hi, Lisa. My question goes in a little bit different direction. We've been talking a lot about preventative measures, but I do know that people in our congregations, even some of our pastors, did catch COVID. And so Mount Sinai in New York, among others, I think there's one in Cincinnati too, are doing long haul studies. And so what advice should we continue to give to those who have been infected by COVID so that they don't take this victorious, I got over it attitude that I'm hearing from some people?
Yeah, hi Bob, it's good to see you. Yeah, and you know, it's a shame. The vaccine is never a magic cape. The original data that came out said it was 95% effective, and that 95% effective is a statistical number based on the clinical trials. But really, when you break that down, it means 1 out of 20 people is potentially not covered. So that's first and foremost. Second, those people who are fully vaccinated who have any form of immunocompromisation, if they've got an autoimmune disease like lupus or something like that, if they've got or psoriatic psoriasis or rheumatoid arthritis, anybody who's undergoing cancer treatment, anybody who's been a transplant patient. The vaccines are not going to cover them. So even though they're fully vaccinated, they're even less well covered. And again, as antibodies wane, even if a fully vaccinated person is overwhelmed with virus, that virus can take a hold. And like I said, those people who are infected, 30% of those are going to be completely asymptomatic. So they won't even know they have it. And if they're not wearing masks, they're spreading it. So the advice I would give anybody who's vaccinated, and I go back to CDC. CDC is my best source for data at this point. Wear a mask when you're indoors, when you're in a large crowd or even a small crowd with people that you don't live with. CDC is now saying do the same if you're outside. And so even though you're vaccinated, this is still a pandemic and it's still a raging one. So protect yourself and protect those around you. The other thing that we've been talking about here is that you don't necessarily know if you are transmitting virus to someone who has a young child at home who is not yet eligible for a vaccine, or living with someone who is otherwise at risk, an underlying medical condition or somehow immunocompromised, where that risk of transmission from you to that person to someone else who could get seriously ill. And so it's about protecting both ways. So that's the biggest thing. We should still be socially distancing. I saw somebody ask, should we go back to absolutely shutting it back down and going to virtual? I'm tired of telling people bad news. And so I've not said that yet. But what I have said is that whatever protocols you had back in January and February of this year, at our worst, consider that. Take a deep breath and start to have those conversations. At the end of the day, it's session who's responsible for the decision on building utilization. It's also up to session to police those. It can't be the pastor. So, they have to make the decision. How can they best protect those people who are coming into the sanctuary? And if that's virtual, if the church has the ability to do that, then that might not be a bad situation, particularly as we now get back into colder weather. We really can't be outside. People are inside, the heat's back on. All of that becomes important. So somebody asked me the other day, one of my pastors said they have an anti-vaxxer, anti-masker in their congregation. And the person was challenging the pastor, well, tell me how big the virus particles are. You've got to prove to me that a mask can keep out those micron-sized virus particles. Well, it's not the virus particles that are floating through the air. It's the virus particles in a droplet. Those droplets can be microscopic, but those droplets contain hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of virus particles. So the issue here is when we are in a hot, humid environment, those particles, those droplets become much bigger, and they literally, it's just physics, they just fall to the ground faster. So you're not projecting those as far. When you get into a hot, heated, dry air condition like we're going to in the fall and the winter, those particles go much further because they're smaller. And so the infection and the transmission rate is actually affected by simple physics at that point. So I would say mask up, and mask up.
Lisa, thank you. I have a question for you, and it's one that I've thought about often. So what about inside eating at a restaurant? And we have a few more minutes. If others have questions, please begin to raise your hand. And after Lisa responds to this one, we'll be happy to take your questions. What do you think, Lisa? Eating?
Yeah, Donna, Cincinnati, the cool part of Cincinnati actually has blocked off streets now where there's outside tents or outside eating. And that I'm willing to do as long as it's also socially distanced. At this point, given the fact that we're about to go inside, I won't be in restaurants personally. I don't think at this point that with the incredible transmissibility of the Delta variant being 200 times more what it was last winter, I'm just not willing to take that chance. And so I'll be doing a lot of cooking.
Yes. Thank you for answering my question. It was always strange to me that you could eat in a restaurant near other people and not still be spreading the virus. Warren, you have a question.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you for sharing with us. I guess the question I have we've talked a lot about worship service, and that's somewhere between 60 and 90 minutes or 2 hours. Presbytery meetings are a little bit different. You're there for many hours, and I'm just would like to hear your thoughts about whether it's advisable to even think about coming back together until we have this dampened down much more than it is today.
Yeah, Warren, it's a great question. It really is. So I will say that all of our Presbytery meetings have been by Zoom. We did in the Presbytery Cincinnati, we do them quarterly, and every other one in February and in August. We do it on a Saturday because we also offer a number of workshops for both our pastors and anybody who wants to come. We've been able to do that by Zoom. This August, just a month ago, we decided to try and do it in person, but it was actually before the Delta variant went crazy. It was also in my biggest church, and so we could very easily socially distance. We kept the agenda very short. We did do workshops, but we did them outside. Those that we did inside, we did in big rooms where people could really distance, and we sort of planned it all out. It worked well. We live streamed it for people who were not comfortable. Masks were required of everybody. And that decision, we did at council with the understanding that we were going to lose people either way. If I didn't require masks, there were going to be people that were uncomfortable coming and would not come. And if I did require masks, there would be people who would be uncomfortable coming and wouldn't come. And so it was a toss up at that point. And so we're going with safety. We ensured that everybody there was masked the entire time. We provided a box lunch and told people to bring lawn chairs. Luckily, it was a beautiful day. We sent them outside to have lunch so that nobody was really that close. From this point on, until Delta wanes, my Presbytery meetings will be back on Zoom.
Okay, thank you. I guess I can't reserve Central Park in New York City for a Presbytery meeting.
But the green, I mean, come on, right there by the reservoir, absolutely.
Maybe.
Other questions? This is the time to get your questions in, and we hope that you, any more questions? Going once, twice?
I see Evan has his hand raised.
Evan? Thank you.
Yeah.
Please ask your
Yes,
question.
quick question, Lisa, about the data sources. I know a lot of churches, looking at the metrics on when to dial back things. Some churches say, when the positivity rate goes to a certain point. But as I'm getting ready to start my new call in Corfu and looking at the New York State health data compared to CDC data compared to the positivity rate on COVID Act Now, I see a range for the county that the church is in. I can see a range from on the New York State side, it might say 3.5%, but on COVID Act Now, I'm seeing 8%. And CDC somewhere in the middle. So can you offer some guidance on, what data sources are most reliable?
Yeah, I mean, in their own ways, they're all reliable, which is not the answer you want to hear. But for sanity's sake, pick one. Don't try to compare the data. They report at slightly different times. They report in slightly different ways. My go-to two are CDC and COVID Act Now, because that's the two that I have found that track best. But even then, I tend to go to COVID Act Now. Both of them now, by the way, are also listing vaccination rates, and those actually do help. The beautiful part about both CDC and COVID Act Now is that it's an amalgam of data. So it's everything from the R rate, the infectivity rate, the positivity rate, the vaccination rate, but also your hospitalization utilization. So if you're in an urban setting like Warren and Robert and Sampson, and you're in New York City, you've got tons of hospitals. you're probably never going to get to very high on hospital unless it's really overwhelmed. If you're in a rural area, however, where there's 1 hospital and 2 ICU beds, you're going to max that out really fast. And that's also an important consideration for how you protect your people. It's not just the virus, it's also what measure of care can they get should you start to get ill people. Because that also affects people who don't have COVID, but are having cardiac arrests and stroke. So it's all of that. Those are the 2 that I tend to use best. It, oddly enough, the local boards of health are not the best source of data.
Thank you.
Steph,
We
you have your hand
Steph.
up.
Yes, uh-huh.
Hi there. I'm from First Presbyterian Church of Yorktown in Hudson River Presbytery. And I'm the youth director and sort of at the moment de facto Christian ed director. So everybody is super anxious to try, or not everybody, but a lot of people are super anxious to try and get kids back into in-person Sunday school. We did all of our Sunday school and youth group meetings on Zoom last year. Kind of worked. It worked for the younger kids and the middle kids. Older kids didn't like it as much. Anywho, so people want to go back to in-person Sunday school. Just wondering if you have any recommendations on particular safety precautions. I know I have printed out the recommendations from the New York State Board of Ed, and I'm trying to get everybody to follow them, but it's a little challenging because people aren't thinking Sunday school is the same thing as school, even though we have people sitting at desks or tables looking straight at each other and talking at each other. So
it's a good question, and you're right, it is exactly the same as school. And so, it's harder when your local school districts aren't mandating masks. More and more are beginning to. We've had entire districts shut down here because of the absentee rate. And so it's become quite acutely obvious that masking works in kids and that kids are transmitting the virus. And unvaccinated teachers are transmitting the virus. So it's gotten pretty bad. But I would say, if parents want to send their kids to Sunday school, the teachers should be vaccinated, although that's hard to mandate. And the kids should be masked for the entire time. And if they can't mask their kids, particularly because the kids can't get vaccinated, the younger ones can't get vaccinated yet, but even the older ones, you should be masked at all times indoors at this point. And as much as you can distance, I know that's harder in a Sunday school room, but as much as you can distance.
Thank you. Yeah, we've already announced that everybody's got to wear masks, and we're doing away with Sunday school snack because having people take off their masks to eat goldfish crackers is just not worth the risk at this point.
Yeah. Especially for the little ones who then rub their noses and do all kinds of other things. Yes, exactly. I've been there. That's right. Well, good luck.
Thank you.
We have just a few more minutes, and I wonder, Lisa, if you have any last comments to share with us, and we certainly do appreciate your wisdom that you've given us today.
Well, I hope it's helpful. I mean, no, I think you guys, you have the right tools because you've got Jesus. And so you love your people and you do the best that you can to guide them in so many ways. You're going to do the same thing here. If you've got other questions, you're free to send them to me directly. I'm on the Presbytery of Cincinnati website, or you can send them through Sandonna. I will send Sandonna some of the resources that I have. And so you send out nothing's proprietary, so send them around. But yeah, blessings to you all. This is hard. It's hard work. And the work that you do is hard enough, as if this wasn't going to make it more difficult.
Lisa, thank you so very much. And please extend our thanks to the Cincinnati Presbytery for lending you to us today to share your wisdom. We do want to say to everyone that this recording will be posted on the YouTube page for the Synod, the Facebook page, and then also on the Synod's website so that you can continue to share this information. Blessings to you as you continue to discern what's next and how you lead your ministries this coming fall. And we are keeping you in our prayers. Again, join me in just thanking Lisa for being with us today. So Lisa, thank you very much. And we certainly do appreciate you, as our denomination appreciates you as well.
You be blessed. Be blessed. I'll see you
That's
soon.
it.
Alrighty, bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.